and thank you for inviting me to be part of the UPGA Business Summit this year in 2022. What I want to try to discuss and outline for you today is what's happening in the consumer portion of the market and what's happening with frozen sales, both domestically and internationally. So I'm just going to run through the following items, looking at U.S. potato sales and utilization from last year, looking at domestic market update, and then providing an international market update today with a focus on frozen as indicated. So for sales and utilization of U.S. potatoes, last marketing year, which is July of 20 through June of 2021, you can see that utilization was down, and this was due to the fact that retail sales were slightly off from where they were the previous marketing year, which was very elevated due to the COVID restrictions. Food service sales continued to be down because of the inability for people to dine out as much as they'd like to. And then exports, though, did increase as we recovered from the problems the previous year. And imports were also up, which does lower U.S. utilization. So overall, we were off 6%, which is really not that dramatic given how many changes and problems there were in the market. If we compare 2021 to the 2 years ago, we see we're off a little bit more because that was a pre-pandemic situation. So overall, though, we're seeing a slight decline, mainly driven by food service, but still strong demand for U.S. potatoes. If we look at how those potatoes that were grown in the U.S. were utilized, we see that the majority, 40%, went to frozen. Fresh accounted for 25%, followed very closely by chips at 23%, then DHI at 7%, refrigerated, and then the other categories. It's important to note that DHI is probably undercounted because given the way we do this study, it's very difficult for us to capture all the DHI that goes into pet food and different types of ingredient items. This is what's been interesting. So over the last few years, I've been talking about how food service can take a greater share of the market as retail was slowly declining. Obviously, 2 years ago, when we had the problems with the restrictions from COVID and just all the changes to the marketplace, we saw a big shift back to retail increasing its importance. Well, this last year, we are back to a situation where retail is actually still very high and food service declined even further. So an interesting dynamic in the market there between food service and retail. Now let's just look at actual sales, because that's how we do this utilization work, is we look at the actual sales that we get from IRI for retail and estimates from Technomics in terms of what goes into the food service sector. So if we look by product in these two different main channels, we see that frozen sales were only off 4% to food service. And that's because the quick service restaurants recovered much more quickly than the other types of restaurants. And so demand for frozen fries rebounded quite quickly. Fresh, which goes more into the mid-scale and the higher end dining establishments, which didn't recover as well, was off more, closer to 11%. And then chips is an interesting one because you would think that with the return to quick service, that would help. But a lot of chips in sort of mid-scale restaurants are served by shaking them out of a bag. That had to change to serving the little individual packages, which contain a lot less chips, actually. So just less volume gets utilized that way. On the retail side of things, we see that frozen continued to grow. It has had a really strong response as people have had to buy more of their food at retail. They've realized that there are these frozen products and that they work quite well in their air fryer that they just got or in the oven. So that's been a positive. Fresh was off about 2%, which really was not that bad given how high it was the previous year. Chips settled back a little bit again too, as people weren't snacking at home quite as much. Refrigerated continued to grow, and canned dropped off from its 15 minutes of fame the previous year. All right, let's look at an update on more recently and what's happening with the domestic market. And if we look at a 5-year period, we see sort of what I was talking about earlier, that sales have been flat to declining. And then in marketing year 20, as the pandemic really impacted the marketplace, they shot up, and then a slight decline this last year. But overall, for the 5-year period, retail sales of all potato products, volume, not value, which is up more, but volume is up 7%. Food service volume sales went the other way, but not too bad considering how many problems have been facing the food service industry. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later, but from closures to labor, et cetera, it's been tough for food service to keep the volume of product going. So we see a 19% decline over the 5 years. We do think this is the bottom though, and it's going to start to improve. And then imports. This is an interesting piece. And there were a lot of contractions in production of potatoes over the last couple of years here in the US due to contracts being reduced, et cetera. And so to make up for that, because demand didn't go down as much as some thought, we've seen this almost 14% increase in import volumes. It's important to note that the majority of these imports still come from Canada, around 85%. So that is where most of this product is coming from. Now let's drill down even more closely into what's been happening this marketing year. So from July through November, which is the most recent figures we have, we say that total retail sales are up in value, up 0.6%, and that volume is off 6%, which is not too surprising. And then you see a significant price increase. And we know from all of our experiences that prices are up, and certainly prices for food and potato products are up. So a 7% increase in the price. We now drill down by the specific products. It's pretty interesting. And you see that the value of chips is up, volume off. Volume is off for most of these products across the board. But what I want you to focus on is this bottom line here, where you see what's the comparison with 2019. In that case, almost across the board, the volume is up from where we were pre-pandemic. So yes, we've come off of those highs in 2020, but we are still in a very strong position at retail from where we were previously. On the fresh side, drilling down by the different types, you see pretty similar story in terms of declines this year compared to last year, but then still strong growth compared to the previous year, except for with the russets and the whites. And the whites have been in a sort of a slow decline for many years, so that's not too surprising. What's pretty amazing is that if you look at petites are up still despite the overall declines in other products, and yellows continue to do extremely well as the medleys, which is sort of a new category for the potato industry, and we continue to exploit consumers' interest in and demand for those types of packages. All right, now let's go back to this concept around people's food habits and where they're buying their food and how they're getting their food shifting so dramatically. So we see that food at home was on a slow, long decline. Well, the expenditure on food consumed at home compared to the expenditure of food eaten away from home was on this long, slow decline as away from home continued to increase. Okay, 2020, you see this huge shift back again to where at home was the predominant area, with away from home being much declined. Well, it's amazing how quickly that has recovered and returned to a point where this September, the expenditures were even. Now, it's important to note that this is expenditure and not volume, because obviously food purchased away from home costs more per unit, if we will, than food that's purchased to be consumed at home. But we see this return to where we were of people eating away from home more than at home. And I suspect that unless we have some significant changes in the future here, that this trend will return to what it was doing. All right. In terms of sales of potatoes to the food service sector, we get estimates from Technomics because there aren't register things that we can look at like you can for retail, but we feel that these estimates are pretty close. And this gives a very good indication of what's been going on. The blue line across the top was 2019. Good, strong sales increases over time, quarter by quarter. Things were doing pretty good. And then you look at the purple or red line down at the bottom. That's what happened starting in the first quarter of 2019 to the second quarter when we had the biggest impacts. Things really declined. And then they did start to recover. So far in 2021, calendar year 2021, we see that things are almost back to where they were by the end here, almost back to where they were in 2019. So decent growth and recovery. The third quarter of 2020 compared to 2021 compared to 2020 is up 29%. So this is positive, and this is back to what I was talking about, the people deciding or estimating that sales wouldn't recover this quickly and the need for imports. This shows how those sales of frozen to food service really have recovered quickly, and that's why we are a little short domestically in terms of product. If we look at fresh, we don't have quite as long a timeline of information here, but on a quarterly basis. So what this is just looking at quarter three sales in 2019, 2020, and 2021. But we've broken it down a little bit by the types of restaurants, type of food service operations that this product was sold to. So the top line is beyond restaurants. So that is cafeterias, that is theaters and ballparks, and you're not your traditional restaurants. The green is full service restaurants. So that's where you have a waiter and somebody serves you that way. And then the blue on the bottom is limited service restaurants, QSRs, et cetera. Now, of course, the majority of fresh potatoes are sold in that full service, which goes all the way from high-end dining to diners and things like that. But it is full service. So we saw the big decline in 2020, but here by 2021, third quarter of 2021, we have recovered quite well. And I think that we are heading back to where we were, again, if restaurants can meet some of the challenges facing them. All right, so what are those factors that are impacting the domestic market? Certainly, the concerns around COVID, the issues around COVID are not going away. And it's hard to know what's going to happen here in the first 6 months of 2022, but it doesn't look like we're completely out of the woods yet. So those concerns, those impacts will continue to be significant. The supply chain issues are serious and they are a real problem. All of you know how difficult it is to get trucks. All of you know how difficult it is to book shipping. Certainly when it comes to exports and imports, it's even worse. But domestically, there are a lot of problems as well. And that will continue to have an impact and certainly drive up costs of our product before it reaches the consumer, which then leads to inflation. I'm going to skip here a little bit. We are seeing this dramatic increase in inflation. Prices that the growers are receiving are going up, but they're probably not going up as high or as quickly as input costs. So that is going to be a continuing problem for the growers. Then labor shortages are really serious, and they're really serious in the food service industry. Most restaurants are limiting the number of tables that they have available, limiting how much they can sell, not from supply issues, though those are a factor, but more so because they just don't have the labor to cook and serve the food. And then finally, the food police, or there are still continuing movement towards ultra restrictive nutrition type requirements that oftentimes target our products, certainly when it's in the fried form of fries or chips. So that is a concern and a factor that we're going to have to keep looking at, and certainly something that we at Potatoes USA and the National Potato Council work hard on every single day. So this is now looking at more sort of the trends, consumer trends, what's happening out there that's going to impact demand for our product. And one of the things that came out of everybody having to eat at home is that they figured out that they can cook. They figured out that cooking is not that hard, especially if you have a little bit of time. It's kind of fun. You make some good food. It's cheaper for sure. So at-home cooking, while it's going to decline, it is more ingrained, and I think we're going to see people continue to do it. Yet they are now getting busier. They now have more demands on their times again. So they're going to be looking for convenience. So it's going to be this interesting combination of cooking at home, but wanting some convenient ingredients to make it go quicker. So I think we're going to continue to see, those medley packs that can go in the microwave, dehy, refrigerated, frozen, those types of products that are easier to use. There's going to be continuing and increasing demand for them. Online shopping is here to stay. People still like to go to the grocery store, but a lot of folks have realized that they can do this online thing quite effectively, quite efficiently. The services have gotten better, so the product they receive is better. Majority of it is still curbside pickup, but folks are having it delivered as well. But we need to think about that, and we need to think about how our product is being displayed online, because that is where a lot of people are starting to purchase. From a culinary perspective, we see this fusion continuing to take off. You look at trends that are coming out, and it's like 4 different types of cuisines all mashed together. So again, just from a culinary perspective, we need to be aware of that and continue to innovate, which certainly Chef RJ is doing here at Potatoes USA. All right, sustainability. We all hear about this. We all know that people are concerned. The impacts and issues around climate change are becoming more and more present, and people are feeling a need to do something. This term of climatarianism, where people are making decisions around their diet based on the impact or their perceived impact on the environment, is real, and we need to consider it, and we need to be in a position to answer people's needs in this space. And then folks are looking for healthy eating, but that is definitely changing. It is not so much what it used to just be, which was low calorie equated to healthy. People are realizing that foods provide functional benefits. People are realizing that food can help them with different diseases and so forth. So what they're eating and why they're eating it is very specific to different people, but they are looking for healthy, and we need to make sure that they understand that potatoes are healthy. Bottom line, though, Americans love potatoes, and we cannot forget this, and we need to continue to build on this. In survey after survey, when asked what their favorite vegetable is, Americans always reply, number 1 is the potato. When we ask them what their favorite takeout dish is, it's fries. Even though there have been a lot of difficulty with fries, but there's also been some real improvements by the processors and the restaurants. Fries are the favorite takeout. Fries are the favorite side dish when you look at what's ordered. And then when you look just at the sales of vegetables in retail, potatoes are still number 1. So this is a great place to be, obviously. We just need to continue all as an industry to work hard to stay there. All right, let me switch to international quickly. Just a reminder that 1 in 5 rows, or 20% of the potatoes grown in the United States, are exported. So it's an important part of our industry, and one we need to remember and stay focused on as we move forward. If we look at the export volumes, it's been a little up and down. This sort of makes it look in some ways more up and down than it really was, but exports have been growing. If you look at a long timeline, we're way up over time. There's just been some of these issues, and you see in market year 20, as the pandemic really hit Asia first, we lost a lot of exports, but you can see we've already covered almost all of those, and we're up over where we were in marketing year 17. Now, if we drill down to this year, this is last year, sorry, this is last marketing year 21 over 20, we see that we saw decent recovery from those big declines. Frozen was up 2%, dehy was off 4% because it didn't decline as much during the height of the pandemic, and then fresh is up 9%. So that's what happened last marketing year, a total increase of 4%. Our top markets last marketing year, very interesting here. We see Mexico as the #1 market, and that used to be the third most important market, but it jumped ahead of Canada and Japan, which is quite astounding. We've seen a huge increase in exports of frozen there, and we've seen increases of fresh, despite the fact that for this time period, we were still restricted 26 kilometers. A couple other markets that did well, South Korea and Taiwan, they did a very good job of controlling COVID in those markets, didn't have as many impacts. So those markets did well. A couple that didn't do as well, Philippines and China, where we saw real draconian measures taken and real declines in our exports to those markets. And I think it's important to note, Saudi Arabia is now a top 10 market for us. We are now working there as Potatoes USA. And so hopefully we can continue to build on that. All right, now these are the figures for this current marketing year. And what we have to date is July through October, so the first 4 months of the marketing year. And you see this really strong recovery in exports from those lows. I mean, we need to keep in mind that it is compared to some pretty low sales at this time period last year. But frozen is up 21% and fresh up 17%. Very pleased about that. Since dehydrated didn't decline as much, it is not up. Now, despite these positive numbers, the issues with shipping, the problems with getting bookings, the problems with getting containers, the increased costs really have limited this. If it wasn't for those shipping issues, these figures would be much higher. We'd see even more increases because demand in the international marketplace is up strongly. All right, so here are some of the factors when we look at international. And one of them, as I mentioned earlier, is the fact that we did contract on our production. And if you look here over the last 2 years, we had a 1% decline in 2020 and an almost 2% decline in 2021. So we have less potatoes than we did previously to export. Conversely, the EU has increased in both years, and Canada has a very large crop this year. So our competitive position in the international marketplace is going to be a little bit challenged because of this supply issue. Now, if we look forward and we think about what is going to happen from a supply perspective, I do hope that we are able to make some changes going forward. You can see that there's been a lot of frozen processing capacity added, where it says CA, like Simplot CA in 2020, that's Canada. But so this is North America. We have had some good increases in our processing capacity. And as we're able to fully utilize this capacity and we have enough raw product, we're going to be in a much stronger position when it comes to exports and domestically, quite frankly, in the frozen sector. The dollar has weakened from January through December. So this last year, we've seen a slight decline in the dollar. This obviously helps our exports. We are still up from where we 2 years ago. And these movements haven't been that significant that they've had a really big impact, but it does help us somewhat with the dollars a little bit weaker compared to our competitors' currencies. This is the real issue, the shipping problems. And they keep getting worse, unfortunately. I just read this morning about how the LA, despite all the efforts, is still slower than it was previously few months. So when is this going to improve? Everything I hear talks about, May, maybe the summer. It's not going to get fixed immediately. It's going to continue to be an issue, certainly for imports, but that really ripples into our exportability. And it's very unfortunate because, as I mentioned, demand is very strong. We just can't get the product there. So one very important change to our market dynamic, as I speak to you here on December 17th, we're still not in a position where we are exporting yet, but all signs are that we are going to have access to all of Mexico for fresh potatoes. APHIS is going through the process of registering the sheds, getting the shippers signed up to be able to export. And then we should see shipments begin in January. Though, we've had lots of ups and downs over many years, so you never know for sure, but it does feel pretty good right now. I really want to stress, though, that the quickest way for us to have this shut down again is if there are a lot of fines for pests on the product that we send into Mexico. So we have to send the most perfect product we can. It needs to meet all of the requirements. There can be no fines because that will be used to shut the market again. So even if we aren't able to meet all the demand initially because we just don't have high enough quality product, that's not a problem. It's more important that we ship good product and keep the market open going forward. That's the end of my presentation. I appreciate UPGA taking the time to film this so that those of you that weren't able to attend the business summit can view it. And thank you so much for your attention.